Hello and welcome to Lean In Leander. I'm your host, Andrew Dean, and in this episode, I want to take a minute to look back in time, look all the way back to May 1st of 2021. Yes, you're right. We're going to spend a little bit of time here today talking about the most recent election. Um, that's because I had an initiative that many of you should be familiar with called Vote in Leander, which, by the way, that website will remain active throughout the runoff and beyond because I still want to encourage people to register to vote for future elections. So it's an ongoing process and an ongoing initiative. And we'll keep that website up and make it real simple for you to register to vote when you come to town, or if you're new, or if friends ask, hey, how do I register to vote in this place? Send them to voteinleander.com. With that said, again, I want to take a look at some of the numbers that come out of this most recent election and just talk about that a little bit from my perspective on how that affects some of the changes that have taken place, as well as some things that possibly could have happened had the numbers been a little bit different. So that's kind of how we're going to take a look at this. And I want to encourage you, of course, to continue to make your voice heard. There is a runoff coming up. In that vein, I have asked all four candidates, all four remaining candidates, to appear here on Lean In Leander and discuss some topics mutually. So I'd like to have the candidates from place 2 and the candidates from place 4 meet together to have an opportunity to discuss some specific issues that I feel would affect the voters in Leander, Texas. So I'm hoping they'll take me up on that. We're still working out some logistics, but I believe everybody has at least given an initial nod to that they would be interested in it. So as soon as I confirm with the candidates, I'll go ahead and get that out to the viewers and listeners here on Lean In Leander. So I hope you're looking forward to those episodes. I certainly am, and I certainly hope that we're able to make those come to fruition. Now let's take a look at some of the numbers here from this most recent election, and I want to kind of put a few things out there for you guys to think about. So let's take a look. So let's take a look first at the population growth in Leander. I think this is pretty interesting to the overall effect this is having on the municipal elections here. So when we go back to 2010, the census actually had the population at 26,521 people. And as you'll note over the next few years, obviously jumping ahead a little bit in 2018, but looking at numbers from 2018 and 2019, and then moving forward to 2020 and 2021, you see that exponential growth that takes place. According to available information, the population in 2021 is right at 75,976 people. Now, that could be give or take a couple of thousand. I've heard a lot of people say that we're already at 80,000. And when you look at these numbers, basically, there's been a 186.47% increase in population in Leander since the 2010 census. That's massive. And it's also 24 times faster than the national average. And when you take a look at those numbers over that stretch of time, it works out to about a 9.65% increase annually. Again, much, much faster than the national average. So let's take a look at the number of voters versus the population. Now, in 2018, in the mayoral election, which is typically where the most votes are placed, the total number of voters in the regular mayoral race, this did not include the runoff, but in the regular mayoral race in 2018, there were 2,331 voters. All right. And that, of course, would be compared to the population at the time of about 46.5 thousand people. All right. So that's 5% of the population that's voting, which is obviously not a good number. In my opinion, when you compare it to the total population, that's really not a good look. You have 5% of the people who live in the city making a decision for the other 95%. I don't think anybody would think that that's a good thing. Now, when we look at the voter population metric in 2021, it's a little bit better, but let's also keep in mind that the population has increased. So we had about 5,835 voters in this last mayoral election. Again, that's the highest number. And that's comparative to the population. We fixed that population right now around 75,976 people. So it's a better representation, but it's not even 10% of the total population. So again, here, if you have 7% of the people making a decision for the other 93%, again, I don't think that's really a good thing. And I think more people need to get involved. So now let's take a look at this versus registration. Now, I wasn't able to come up with a specific number for voter registration in 2018, but I used some averages and I went backwards, if you will, to kind of figure out what the numbers might have been in 2018. And what I was able to find from that perspective was about 11% of those registered voters actually voted in the 2018 election. And when you look at those numbers nationwide, they were up nationwide. So that was an increase over typical registration and typical voter turnout in 2018. But when we compare that to 2021, where we do have some numbers, there was about 36,000 registered voters in Leander for the past election here in 2021. And 14% of the registered voters actually went to the polls. So that's a much, much better number overall, but still lagging majorly, in my opinion. Again, here you have 14% of the population of the city making a decision for 86%. I would argue that you want to see at minimum 25%, because 25% would be fully 1/4 of the population. And at that point, you can start to really argue that, all right, that's a representative population base, okay? That's just my opinion. I don't have any scientific facts to back that up necessarily, but I think when you do some reading on that type of thing, you'll find that those are the types of averages that would make sense if you're looking to increase voter outcome, which again was one of the premises behind doing the Vote in Leander series. Now, when we look at the races themselves, the mayoral race had a 150% increase in turnout. So basically, more than double the number of people who voted in 2018, which again is a good thing, but also reflective of the increase of population in the city of Leander. When we took a look at the other places, we see a very similar number, okay? So we see about 161% increase for place 2 in the total number of votes. Place 4, we see 153% increase in the total number of votes. In place 6, again, 155% increase in the total number of votes. Now, the reason I bring this up, because I think all votes matter. And the reason I think that counts is because when you look at the total number of voters who voted in the mayoral race, 58,035. If you look at each individual place after that, 2, 4, and 6, remember, these are at-large positions. There's not any specific district that they're representing or a specific area of the city of Leander. So you would think that the people in Leander would want to vote for all 4 races. But that's not the case. When you look at that number, you can see where this could definitely make a difference in the way that the election turned out. So let's take place 2, for instance. In place 2, there is a runoff between Mike Sanders and Esmeralda Traube. And that's because neither one of them could really get 100 or get over the 50% or 50% threshold to be declared a winner. Okay, so with that being the case, you can make the argument that because there were 3 candidates there, it makes a difference in the way that those votes turned out. And so again, nobody's able to get a full, clear majority. And then you have 3 people running and you split the votes a little bit. So that is something that we can kind of see happened here. But if we add in those 108 votes between the second and first place finish, if you will, the top 2 candidates who move on to the runoff, let's just say for argument's sake, all 108 of those votes go to Esmeralda. Well, all of a sudden, that's a much tighter race, okay? So my argument here is that because you did not vote in place 2, you affected the outcome of place 2, regardless of the fact that there were 3 candidates there. And that's just one way of looking at the numbers, okay? If you move on to place 4, again, here we see where that number would have made a difference. Now, the main thing that happened here in place 4, I would argue, is that Steve Haynes, even though he dropped out of the race, and he dropped out pretty early overall, he still garnered 462 votes. That made a difference in this race, okay? That alone affected how this turned out. Because you could argue that Steve, who dropped out of the race with the stated intent of not to split the vote, still split the vote. Either that or he has 462 friends who just wanted to vote for him regardless. So either way you cut it, that did have an impact on the vote itself. But again, here, if you take those 211 votes, and let's just say we give those to Nicole, for instance, that changes the dynamics of this particular race, all right? So the 211 people who didn't vote in place 4, again, maybe you're part of the 108 who didn't vote in place 2, but the idea here is that you're not voting at an at-large berth. So if you're not voting for all of the candidates, you're affecting the way that race turns out. It's better, I think, my opinion is, that you vote in all of the elected positions, especially in an at-large race. It makes all the difference in the world. And again, here, I would argue that that changes the dynamics of the runoff. It doesn't change the results per se, but it does change the dynamics if you add those 211 votes back in, okay? If you give them to Donnie, it might have put him over. It might have actually given him the race. So again, you look at that and you say, what could have happened? Well, that makes a difference. And this is why I say votes all matter, okay? Now, if you look at place 6, specifically here, there was 254 votes that were not placed out of the total number of people who voted, okay? Again, it might be the same 108, 211 people. I would imagine that it might be. I don't know. But if you didn't vote in the place 6 election, it made a difference. Because if you had taken those 254 votes, and let's just say everybody voted for the incumbent in that particular regard, it would have flipped the race. It would have changed the results. Worst case scenario, maybe neither one of them get the threshold and they have another runoff. But if you just take a look at raw numbers, it could have changed the results of that entire election. And we'd have a different representative in place 6. Now, with all that said, I obviously want to wish each of the candidates my very best in their efforts. Thank them for taking the time and putting themselves into the public sphere, because it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it's a very time-consuming and, psychologically just tiring process. And of course, for the winners in each of the elected positions in the mayoral race and in council place 6, I want to congratulate Christine Sederquist and Becky Ross. They were the ones who achieved the most voter support. And of course, they will move on and take their rightful place on the dais going forward after, I believe, May 20th, I think is when the swearing in process is taking place. Now we have a runoff for the other 2. And again, I reiterate, I have an open invitation to those candidates. I certainly hope we have an opportunity to talk to them about this personally. Now, there is something else that I just want to talk about a little bit here, and it goes to the bottom line as far as the changes that I think we see here in the city of Leander, and it helps inform the way we move forward as a city, in my opinion. All right, so we know that in the past few years, actually, it goes way back if you really want to get into it. But let's just say for the conversation, over the past few years, politics has become very divisive. I remember a point in time when growing up, you were told not to talk about sex, religion, and politics. Obviously, times have changed because those 3 things are what a lot of people really kind of concentrate their conversations on. For better or worse, whatever the case might be, I personally feel those are the things that most people deal with on a day in, day out, with the exception of politics. I think politics tends to fall into a smaller group of people who are concerned about current events and the like. I know there's a lot of people, it shows in the numbers, there's a huge amount of apathy there. Really, even when you look at 36,000 people who were registered to vote out of a population of right under 76,000, it kind of gives you an idea that about half the people aren't participating, which is not good. But, it's not something that we're going to solve overnight. Anyway, I thought this was very interesting. This was something that I ran across and played with a little bit. And I wanted to enter a couple of different addresses here. This is just a random address I picked out in Leander, Texas. It's a house for sale. I'm assuming maybe nobody lives there. If you do live there, any apologies necessary, please accept them. This was just to make a point and to show some information here. So when we look at how politically diverse areas are in Leander, if we take this House Creek Drive address and we take a look at it overall, you can kind of see in Leander, it's very purplish. I mean, you get to the outskirts, it does turn a little bit more red. And now we are talking about party affiliation. So conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, however you define that, that's how you can look at this, okay? I'm not trying to make that point. All I'm trying to show is the diversity of thought. You see here in Leander, now when we move to the specifics there, you can see that many of the neighbors in that area are Republicans. It's not quite a bubble, but it's not quite as diverse as other areas. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to come back over here, and I'm actually going to use my own address. And the reason that I'm doing this is to make a point, because I live in an area of Leander that's newer, okay? Out towards Hero, a lot of new development, a lot of new subdivisions. And so this kind of starts to give you a sense of what I think is the trend. And when you look at that, the trend is much more diverse, okay? So in the area, there's about 41% Democrat, 48% Republican, and 11% independent. So when you look at those things together, you get a sense for the diversity of thought in the area. This is a newer area with an influx of a lot of different people who are not necessarily from the state of Texas. All you have to do is drive around in my neighborhood to get an idea, look at the license plates. It's simple. But the point here being is there's a lot more diverse school of thought here in the city of Leander, and it's only going to continue to move that direction because, let's face it, with the type of growth that we're seeing in the city, and if that growth continues on its current trend, we could easily see 100,000 people in the city of Leander within the next few years. So that's just a few numbers that I put together to kind of give an idea of some of the influencers in this past election. Most of them really driven just by data. Looking at population base, the increase of population base, I think it indicates that there's a change afoot here in Leander. And I know a lot of people, I've said this before, a lot of people want to keep that small town feel. And I can understand that. I get it. My conversations with Kat Howell have really, influenced the way I look at that, because I think it's important to try to maintain some aspect of that historical reference, whether it's a building or just the way that we understand our history in the city of Leander. I think it's important that we take a look at that, and we don't want to just knock everything down and rebuild. I mean, I know a lot of people would love to see that because it's new and it's wonderful and it's got all the, technology and everything else that might come from that type of approach. But I don't know that that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't know that's right. And I think we can find a balance between the two. And just like we can find a balance between differing opinions on most, if not all, of the issues that influence our electorate and the people who go to vote. A lot of people are going to vote because of one specific issue. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to go vote because of one particular person. Maybe it's a personality thing. I would argue at the municipal level, you need to get away from the popularity contest, and you need to really start talking about the issues that affect the people who are living in your community. So I think it's important, and it's one thing that I am going to encourage all of those who are now on council and moving forward to really, really take a hard look at that. The city is growing fast, and it has a lot of growing pains. And I think when we take a look at that and find ways to solve for those issues. I'm not talking about solving them for today. I'm not talking about moving away from stage 3 water to stage 2 water. That's not a fix. That's a temporary passage of time. We need to fix it to where we don't have to worry about that. And maybe that includes some changes as to the way we live in Leander. Again, maybe the way we landscape or the way that we route our waters or what we're looking at long term from that perspective. And water is just one of many issues that are needing to be addressed in this city. We need to find ways to address those issues and address them for the whole of the community. And once we start doing that, then I think you're going to see the benefits of participating at the municipal level. You have an opportunity to let your voice be heard and get your say in there. It starts with the election, but you have to continue to be diligent. As citizens, it's your duty to be diligent. And that includes bringing up subjects that may be uncomfortable for some people. That's okay. Let's talk about them. Let's have that conversation and let's lean in, Leander, make it a better place for all of us. I hope that you can appreciate what this episode was about and what I've said just right now. And I look forward to having the opportunity to speak with the remaining candidates in a forum that'll allow us to talk about some of those issues. I hope they do participate. They're under no obligation to do so, but I look forward to having that conversation soon. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to the next one. Stick around, and we'll have lots of things coming up that I think you'll like. Hopefully this was one of them. Thanks a lot, folks. Y'all have a good day.